The old Ford pickup rolled to a stop in front of the gleaming showroom, its faded blue paint and rusted wheel wells looking almost defiant against the polished glass facade. Daniel Harper stepped out first, his worn boots hitting the pavement with quiet certainty. A moment later, Lily climbed down from the passenger side, her small hand immediately finding his. She looked up at the towering windows, displaying cars that cost more than some houses, then back at their weathered truck, and whispered to her father that maybe they were in the wrong place. Daniel smiled down at her, calm and reassuring, and led her toward the entrance. He had no way of knowing that in just a few minutes, his dignity would become someone else's entertainment. The showroom smelled like leather and money, that particular scent of new vehicles mixed with expensive cologne, and the faint sweetness of complimentary coffee from the waiting lounge. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vated ceiling, casting prismatic light across the polished concrete floors that reflected every gleaming surface, like mirrors. Along the walls, luxury vehicles sat on raised platforms like sculptures in a museum, each one illuminated by its own dedicated spotlight, designed to make the paint shimmer and the chrome sparkle. A Bentley Continental occupied the center of the room, rotating slowly on a motorized pedestal, its midnight black finish reflecting everything around it like a dark mirror. Soft jazz played through hidden speakers, the kind of carefully curated music designed to make wealthy people feel even wealthier. Daniel held Lily's hand as they walked inside, her sneakers squeaking slightly against the immaculate floor with each hesitant step. She pressed closer to him, suddenly and acutely aware of how loud that small sound seemed in the hushed atmosphere. A few salespeople in tailored suits glanced their way, their expressions shifting from professional welcome to barely concealed confusion when they noticed the truck still visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. One of them whispered something to a colleague while gesturing subtly toward the parking lot, and both men smirked before returning to their tasks with the dismissive confidence of gatekeepers who had already decided these particular visitors did not belong in their carefully curated world of wealth and luxury. Victoria Hale emerged from a private consultation room at the back of the showroom, her designer heels clicking a confident rhythm against the polished floor. At 33, she carried herself with the easy authority of someone who had never been denied anything significant in her entire privileged life. Her cream-colored blazer was perfectly tailored to her slender frame. Her dark hair swept back in an elegant style that looked effortless, but probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery bills. Diamond studs glinted at her ears, subtle but unmistakably expensive. Beside her walked Mark Ellison, the showroom manager, a man whose practiced smile seemed permanently calibrated to match the net worth of whoever stood before him, expanding or contracting based on his rapid assessment of their spending potential. He laughed at something Victoria said, that performative chuckle of someone who understood that keeping VIP clients happy was his primary function. Victoria's sharp gaze swept the room out of habit, cataloging the other customers, the staff positions, the general atmosphere. Then her eyes landed on the truck outside, and she stopped mid-stride. A small laugh escaped her lips before she could stop it, though she made no effort to hide it once it was out. The sound was sharp and dismissive, cutting through the soft jazz like a blade. "Mark," she said, her voice carrying further than perhaps she intended. "Please tell me someone didn't actually drive that thing here. I thought this establishment had standards. Isn't there some kind of screening process for the parking lot?" Mark followed her gaze and cleared his throat, his expression shifting to match her disdain. "It appears so, Miss Hale. I'll have someone speak with them about more appropriate parking arrangements." "Well," Victoria said, smoothing her blazer with perfectly manicured fingers, "I suppose there's a first time for everything. Maybe he's here to apply for a janitorial position. Though, judging by that truck, he probably couldn't afford the cleaning supplies we use on these floors. The wax alone costs more than that vehicle is worth." The words reached Lily clearly, cutting through the ambient quiet of the showroom like stones thrown into still water. The little girl's grip on her father's hand tightened painfully, and she looked up at him with wide eyes that were starting to shine with tears. She was fighting desperately to hold back. Her lower lip trembled almost imperceptibly, and she pressed herself closer to his leg, as if trying to disappear into his protective shadow. Daniel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only outward sign of his reaction to the woman's cruel words. But he didn't turn around to confront her. Instead, he shifted his position slightly, placing his broad frame between his daughter and the source of the mockery. His large body became a shield, blocking Lily's view of the woman, whose laughter still echoed. Victoria noticed the subtle movement and raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow, clearly amused. Oh, how sweet. Father-daughter day at places they can't afford. Someone should tell him the community college down the road has a much more appropriate parking lot for vehicles from that particular decade. They might even let him take pictures with the nicer cars there. A young salesman nearby let out a nervous laugh, more out of social obligation to the obvious VIP than genuine amusement. His colleague elbowed him slightly, but neither made any move to intervene. Mark said nothing, but his conspicuous silence was its own form of agreement, a tacit endorsement of Victoria's casual cruelty. Daniel finally turned, not with the anger that most people in his situation would have displayed, but with a measured calm that seemed almost out of place, given the circumstances. His eyes met Victoria's for just a moment, long enough for her to register that he had heard every single word, and then he looked away, dismissing her, as if she simply wasn't worth the energy of a response. The gesture was so subtle, so devoid of aggression, that it took Victoria a moment to realize she had been dismissed by someone she considered far beneath her station. Lily tugged at his sleeve with urgent fingers. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Can we go, please? I don't like it here anymore. These people are mean." Daniel knelt down to her level, bringing his face close to her so he could speak without being overheard. "Not yet, sweetheart," he said softly, his voice steady and warm. "We came here for a reason. Remember what I told you in the truck on the way over about not letting other people decide how we feel about ourselves?" Lily nodded slowly, but her eyes were still wet and glistening with unshed tears. "Those people don't know us," Daniel continued, wiping a tear from her cheek with his calloused thumb, rough from years of honest work, but impossibly gentle against her soft skin. "They don't know our story. They don't know what we've been through together, or what we mean to each other. And that's okay. We know who we are. That's what matters most in this world." Victoria watched the exchange with a mixture of amusement and barely concealed curiosity. The man's composure irritated her in a way she found surprisingly unsettling. People in his position usually either shrunk away in embarrassment, providing a satisfying show of submission to the social order, or puffed up with defensive anger. He did neither. He simply stood there, solid and unbothered, as if her opinion of him and his truck carried no weight whatsoever in his personal calculation of his own worth. Mark approached Daniel with the enthusiasm of someone being asked to clean up a distasteful spill. His smile was thin, professional, only in the most technical sense, his eyes already dismissing this potential customer as a complete waste of his valuable time. "Can I help you with something, sir?" The word "sir" came out flat and hollow, a formality stripped of any actual respect, almost mocking in its delivery. Daniel straightened to his full height and nodded calmly. "I'd like to look at some vehicles, please." A pause stretched between them, filled with unspoken judgment. Mark's practiced smile flickered like a faulty light bulb. "Of course, perhaps I could direct you to our pre-owned section instead. We have some very reasonable options there that might be more suitable for your particular needs and circumstances. I'd prefer to see your current inventory," Daniel said evenly, his voice betraying nothing. The new models. Mark exchanged a quick, meaningful glance with Victoria, who had drifted closer, clearly entertained by what she expected to be an awkward encounter. "Certainly, though, I should mention our entry-level vehicles in this particular showroom start at around $150,000, plus applicable taxes, registration fees, and documentation charges." Daniel didn't blink or flinch at the number. "That's fine. And most of our customers require extensive financing approval before we proceed with test drives or detailed consultations. It's a lengthy process involving comprehensive credit checks, income verification, asset documentation, and various other protocols." "I understand." Mark hesitated, clearly thrown off balance by the complete lack of reaction to what usually served as an effective deterrent to unsuitable visitors. He had expected the man to make excuses, to suddenly remember an urgent appointment elsewhere, to find some face-saving way to retreat. Instead, Daniel simply waited, patient as stone, his weathered expression revealing nothing. Victoria stepped forward, unable to resist inserting herself into the increasingly interesting situation. "You know," she said, addressing Daniel with the condescending tone one might use with a confused tourist. "There's no shame in knowing your limits. It's actually quite mature to recognize when you're out of your depth. This showroom caters to a very specific clientele, people who have achieved certain things in life. I'm sure there are other dealerships in town that would be much better suited to your budget and your particular aesthetic preferences." Daniel looked at her for a long, measured moment, his gaze steady and completely unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried a weight that seemed disproportionate to its volume. "I appreciate your concern, Mom, but I know exactly where I am and exactly why I'm here today." Lily watched the exchange with the intense attention that children bring to adult conflicts. They don't fully understand, but can sense in their very bones. She didn't know why the pretty lady was being so mean to them, or why her father wasn't getting angry like she had seen other dads do, but she knew with childlike certainty that something important was happening. Victoria tilted her head like a curious bird, studying Daniel as if he were a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. His clothes were simple, undeniably working class, the kind of practical garments you'd find at a hardware store or farm supply outlet. His hands were calloused and rough, clearly marked by years of physical labor. The nails clean, but the skin weathered by honest work. Everything about his appearance screamed modest means and blue-collar background, and yet he stood there without a trace of the embarrassment or intimidation she expected to see. "Tell you what," she said, a hint of challenge sharpening her perfectly modulated voice. "If you're serious about looking at our inventory, I'll personally accompany you on the tour. Consider it a public service. I'd hate for you to waste Mark's valuable time if you're just here to window shop and daydream about things you'll never actually be able to possess." Mark opened his mouth to protest, likely preferring that his VIP client not spend her afternoon babysitting what he assumed was a tire kicker, but Victoria silenced him with a single look that booked no argument. Daniel simply nodded, his expression unchanged. "Fine by me." They moved through the showroom together, an unlikely trio that drew curious glances from everyone they passed. Victoria pointed out various models with exaggerated enthusiasm, quoting prices and specifications as if reading from a menu at an exclusive restaurant where the portions were microscopic and the bills were astronomical. She lingered deliberately on the numbers, emphasizing them with obvious pleasure, watching Daniel's face carefully for the flinch or the sharp intake of breath that would signal she had finally found the limit of his pretense. Daniel listened without comment, occasionally pausing to examine a particular feature, or finish with what appeared to be genuine interest and understanding. Lily stayed close to her father throughout the tour. Her earlier tears dried, but her weariness still evident in the way she kept her small body angled away from Victoria. She didn't understand most of what the adults were discussing, the horsepower figures and leather grades and German engineering terminology, but she understood tone perfectly well, and the pretty lady's condescending tone made her deeply uncomfortable. As they approached a silver Rolls-Royce Phantom parked in a place of honor near the back of the showroom, Lily's attention was drawn elsewhere. A small seating area nearby featured comfortable leather chairs and a polished coffee table covered with automotive magazines featuring exotic cars on their glossy covers. She tugged gently at Daniel's hand, silently, asking permission to sit down and rest her tired feet. Daniel glanced at the seating area, then back at her exhausted face, and nodded with a gentle smile. "Stay where I can see you, sweetheart, and don't worry about anything. We're almost done here." Lily settled gratefully into one of the oversized chairs, her small feet dangling several inches above the immaculate floor. She picked up a magazine and began flipping through the glossy pages absently, though her watchful eyes kept drifting back to her father and the woman who seemed determined to prove something. Victoria watched the girl walk away with an expression that briefly softened before hardening again. "She's sweet," she said to Daniel, and for a moment, just a moment, her voice held something that might have been genuine warmth. "Can't be easy doing this alone, raising a child as a single parent. I mean, Daniel's expression didn't change in the slightest. Doing what? Alone? Raising a child? Being a single parent in this economy? She paused, selecting her words with precision. I assume you are single. No wedding ring that I can see. Driving a truck that should have been scrapped at least a decade ago. And shopping for cars on a Wednesday afternoon when most employed people are hard at work. The profile writes itself. Really? You assume a lot about people you don't know, I observe. Victoria corrected with evident pride in her abilities. It's what made me successful in business and in life. Reading people. Understanding their situations before they even open their mouths to explain themselves. I can usually tell someone's net worth within 30 seconds of meeting them. She gestured vaguely at his clothes, his worn boots, the truck still visible through the expansive windows. You're clearly a hard worker, blue collar, probably construction or something similar. Honest labor, I'm sure, admirable in its own modest way. You came here today because you wanted to show your daughter something beautiful. Give her a taste of a world you'll never actually belong to. It's touching in its way. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried no anger, no defensiveness, just a simple, factual quality that made her confident assessment feel somehow less certain. You see what you want to see. Most people do. It's easier that way. Before Victoria could formulate a suitably cutting response, a small commotion near the seating area drew their attention. Lily had dropped one of the heavy magazines, a glossy publication featuring a limited edition Bugatti on its cover, and its pages had scattered across the pristine floor like autumn leaves. She was scrambling to pick them up with trembling hands, her small face flushed with embarrassment, her movements becoming more frantic as she tried to gather the weward pages. A salesman nearby let out an exaggerated sigh loud enough to be heard throughout the immediate area. This is exactly why we need better screening at the door, he muttered to a colleague. Not quite quietly enough. Next thing you know, they'll be leaving fingerprints on the merchandise and tracking dirt across our floors. Daniel was already moving toward his daughter with protective urgency. But Victoria arrived first, surprising even herself with her quick response. She knelt down gracefully, her expensive designer blazer brushing the floor she had been so proudly describing moments earlier, and began helping Lily gather the scattered pages with efficient movements. It's okay, Victoria said, her voice noticeably softer than it had been all afternoon. It was just an accident. These things happen to everyone sometimes. Lily looked up at her with confused, searching eyes, clearly uncertain whether to trust this sudden kindness from the woman who had laughed so cruelly at their truck. Thank you, Lily whispered finally, her voice barely audible. Victoria felt something shift in her chest, an uncomfortable sensation she quickly identified and just as quickly pushed aside with practiced efficiency. She stood and handed the reassembled magazine to the nearby salesman with a look that dared him to make another comment. Daniel reached them and placed a protective hand on Lily's thin shoulder. You okay, sweetheart? Lily nodded, but her earlier spirit seemed visibly diminished, like a flower that had been carelessly stepped on. She looked up at Victoria with those searching eyes, then back at her father, and asked the question that had been building inside her since they walked through those gleaming doors. Daddy, why did people laugh at our truck? What's wrong with it? Why don't they like us? The showroom seemed to grow quieter still, as if even the carefully curated ambient music had paused respectfully to hear the answer to this important question. Daniel knelt down slowly to his daughter's level, taking both her small hands gently in his much larger, calloused ones. His knees popped slightly as he lowered himself, the sound of a body that had done hard physical work for many years, but his entire focus was on his daughter's upturned face and troubled eyes. Some people think they can tell everything about a person by what they drive, or what they wear, or how much money they have in their pocket, he said, his voice calm and measured and infinitely patient. They look at a fancy car and see success. They look at an old truck and see failure. But that's not how the world really works, Lily. That's just how some people have been taught to see it. And it's a lesson that does them no favors in the end. But that's not true, is it, Daddy? Lily asked, her voice small but certain in its questioning. No, baby. It's not true at all. He tucked a strand of her soft hair behind her ear with infinite gentleness. A person's worth isn't measured by the things they own or the car they drive or the size of their house. It's measured by how they treat others, by the love they give freely, by the kindness they show even when it's difficult. You could put a mean person in the fanciest car in the whole world, and they'd still be mean inside. You could put a good person in the oldest truck on the road, and they'd still be good. The car doesn't change who you are. Only your choices do that. Lily considered this carefully, processing the information with the profound seriousness that children bring to moments they instinctively recognize as important. So, our truck doesn't make us less good than other people. Not even a little bit. Our truck has taken us on 1,000 adventures together. It was there when we brought you home from the hospital on the happiest day of my life. It carried us through good times and hard times, through sunshine and storms. It's been there for every camping trip, every soccer practice, every ice cream run on hot summer nights. It doesn't matter one bit that the paint is faded or that it makes funny noises sometimes. What matters is the memories we've made in it, the life we've built together, the love it carries. Victoria stood frozen a few feet away, completely unable to look away from the scene unfolding before her. She had heard parents talk to children before, at charity events and country clubs. But this was entirely different. There was no performance in Daniel's words, no attempt to impress the onlookers or instruct through shame. Just pure, honest love, delivered with a quiet dignity that made her own earlier comments feel suddenly, viscerally, shamefully small. Lily absorbed her father's words with the seriousness that children reserve for moments they instinctively know will shape who they become. So, it doesn't matter if our truck is old and rusty, not one single bit. And it doesn't matter if people laugh at us. Daniel smiled gently, the kind of warm, reassuring smile that transformed his weathered, work-worn face into something remarkably beautiful. People can laugh all they want. It doesn't change who we are or what we're worth. The only person whose opinion of you really matters is you and the people who truly love you. Everyone else is just background noise that doesn't deserve your attention. Lily nodded slowly, a small but definite movement that suggested an important decision had been made. A crucial lesson had been learned. Okay, Daddy, I understand now. Victoria turned away abruptly, busying herself with examining a nearby vehicle display she had already inspected twice before. But her hands were trembling slightly, an involuntary response she hid by clasping them firmly together behind her back. The conversation she had overheard had stripped something away, some protective layer of certainty she hadn't even realized she was wearing. For a brief, deeply uncomfortable moment, she saw herself through entirely different eyes, and the view was anything but flattering. She thought about her own father, a man who measured human worth exclusively in accomplishments and acquisitions, who had taught her from earliest childhood that image was everything, and weakness was absolutely unforgivable. Success was the only language he spoke fluently, and he had made certain she was fluent in it before she could ride a bicycle. She thought about the endless parties and networking events and the exhausting competition for status, the years spent climbing corporate ladders and accumulating expensive things that were supposed to make her happy, but somehow never quite managed to fill the emptiness inside. And here was this man in worn boots and a faded shirt, teaching his young daughter lessons that Victoria, with all her advanced degrees and impressive professional accomplishments, had never been taught by anyone, giving her something more valuable than any luxury item could ever provide. The discomfort she felt didn't last long. Victoria was highly practiced at compartmentalizing inconvenient emotions, at pushing away thoughts that didn't serve her immediate interests. But a small seed had been planted deep in her consciousness, whether she acknowledged it or chose to ignore it. Mark approached nervously, clearing his throat to announce his presence. "Miss Hale, your next appointment is in 20 minutes. Perhaps we should conclude the tour." Victoria straightened her posture, reassembling her composure like familiar armor being carefully buckled into place. "Actually, Mark, I find myself genuinely curious about our friend here." She turned back to Daniel with a sharpened gaze. "Let's cut to the chase, shall we? You've been remarkably patient, impressively dignified throughout this entire encounter. But we both know the truth. You can't actually afford anything in this room. So, what's the real reason you're here? Is this some kind of social experiment? A YouTube prank? Are there hidden cameras somewhere? Daniel met her gaze with steady, unblinking eyes. No prank, no experiment, no hidden cameras. I told you, when I walked in, I came here to buy a car. That's all. Buy a car? Victoria repeated, her skepticism dripping from every carefully enunciated syllable. With what exactly? Your truck as a trade-in? That antique outside wouldn't cover the sales tax on most of our inventory. I don't intend to trade it in. Then how exactly do you plan to pay for a vehicle that costs more than most people make in several years of full-time work? Daniel's weathered face remained utterly calm, almost serene. That's between me and the dealership, though. If you're asking whether I can afford to be here, the answer is yes, Victoria laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound that echoed off the showroom's high, vaulted ceilings. Forgive me if I don't take your word for it. I've been in business long enough to recognize instantly when someone is in over their head. When someone is playing pretend in a world they don't belong to, the confident act is impressive. I'll give you that much credit. But an act is all it is. You're entitled to your opinion. The complete non-response seemed to frustrate Victoria far more than any argument or defensive explanation would have. She was thoroughly accustomed to people defending themselves vigorously, trying to prove their worth through words and justifications. Daniel's calm refusal to engage on those familiar terms left her without a foothold. Fine, she said, crossing her arms with obvious impatience. Prove it. Then stop looking and actually try to buy something. Let's see exactly how far your confidence carries you when it's time to sign the paperwork, when the numbers are in front of you in stark black and white. Daniel nodded slowly, as if he had been waiting patiently for exactly this invitation. All right. He walked past her, without another word, past the rows of gleaming vehicles, past the Bentley, still rotating endlessly on its motorized pedestal. His footsteps were unhurried, deliberate, the confident walk of a man who knew exactly where he was going and precisely why. He stopped in the far corner of the showroom, where the most exclusive models were displayed behind velvet ropes. There, beneath a skylight that bathed it in natural light like a precious museum piece, sat a Rolls-Royce Phantom. Its deep burgundy finish seemed to glow from within, the rich color of aged wine or autumn leaves at their peak. Mark hurried after him on anxious feet, Victoria following close behind. Sir, that particular vehicle is our flagship model. It's priced at over $600,000. I know, Daniel said quietly, running his calloused hand slowly along the car's flawless hood, his rough fingers tracing the gleaming chrome, detailing with something approaching reverence. I've done my research thoroughly. I know exactly what this car is and exactly what it costs. Victoria laughed again. But there was something distinctly uncertain creeping into it now. You can't possibly be serious about this. Daniel turned to face Mark directly, ignoring Victoria entirely. His voice was calm and businesslike. I'd like to begin the purchase process for this vehicle. Today, if at all possible, Mark's professional smile had become fixed and frozen, caught somewhere between habitual courtesy and genuine confusion. Of course, sir. We would need to start with a comprehensive credit application and proof of income. The financing process typically takes several weeks. I won't be financing this purchase. The simple words hung in the air for a long moment before Mark fully processed them. I'm sorry. I said I won't be financing. I'll be paying in full today. Victoria stepped forward aggressively. You're claiming you can pay over $600,000 for a car in cash just like that. I'm not claiming anything, Daniel said calmly, finally turning to meet her incredulous eyes directly. I'm simply stating a fact. For the first time since she had confidently entered the showroom that morning, Victoria Hale found herself at a complete and total loss for words. She looked at Daniel with entirely new eyes, searching desperately for the crack in his facade, the tell that would reveal the obvious bluff she was certain had to be there. She found nothing but steady, absolutely unshakable calm. Mark cleared his throat nervously. Sir, I'll need some verification before we can proceed. Perhaps a bank statement or proof of funds, of course. Call my banker. Daniel pulled a simple leather wallet from his back pocket, worn soft by many years of daily use, and extracted a plain white business card. No fancy graphics, no embossed lettering, just a name and phone number in simple black font. His name is Robert Chen, at First National Private Banking. He's expecting your call. Mark took the card as if it might bite him, holding it gingerly. He glanced questioningly at Victoria, who nodded slightly, then excused himself to make the call. The showroom had indeed grown remarkably quiet. Other salespeople had stopped whatever they were doing. Even wealthy customers who had been browsing now stood completely still, watching the scene unfold with undisguised curiosity. Lily appeared at Daniel's side, having sensed with a child's intuition that something very important was happening. She slipped her small hand trustingly into his much larger one, and he squeezed it gently. Victoria studied them with entirely new eyes, her carefully maintained confidence visibly wavering for the first time. "Who are you?" she asked quietly, and for the first time since they had met. It wasn't an accusation, but a genuine question. Daniel didn't answer. Mark returned exactly 8 minutes later. His face was a complex mixture of emotions that seemed to be actively fighting for dominance. Shock was clearly winning, closely followed by profound embarrassment and something that looked remarkably like genuine fear. "Mr. Harper," he said, and the dramatic change in his respectful tone was utterly unmistakable. The casual dismissiveness had vanished completely, replaced by something approaching reverence. "I apologize sincerely for any inconvenience you may have experienced today. Mr. Chen has confirmed your account status in full. He mentioned you would be wiring the funds this afternoon." "That's correct." Mark swallowed visibly. "He also mentioned that you're the founder and majority shareholder of Harper Construction Group." The name landed in the hushed room like a physical object. Harper Construction Group was one of the largest and most respected commercial construction companies in the entire state, responsible for building hospitals, schools, government buildings, and major infrastructure projects across the region. Their annual revenue was measured in hundreds of millions of dollars. Their reputation for quality work was absolutely unimpeachable. Victoria's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: disbelief, profound embarrassment, something that might have been anger at herself, and finally, a kind of stunned recognition that her entire carefully constructed worldview had just been completely and utterly upended. "Harper Construction," she repeated slowly, as if saying the famous words out loud might somehow help her understand them better. "The Daniel Harper." Daniel inclined his head slightly in modest acknowledgement. "Just Daniel is fine. But your truck," Victoria said helplessly. "Your clothes? You look like you work for a construction company, not own one of the largest in the state." "I do work for it every single day. I started as a common laborer when I was just 19 years old, carrying lumber and mixing concrete in the hot sun. I still visit job sites regularly, still get my hands dirty whenever needed." He paused thoughtfully. "That truck out there was my father's. He gave it to me when I started the company. Told me to never forget where I came from, to never forget the value of honest work. I haven't forgotten. I never will." The showroom was absolutely silent now. Every person within earshot stood frozen. Mark had begun sweating more visibly. "Mr. Harper, I cannot apologize enough for how you were treated today. The comments that were made, the assumptions, the way you and your daughter were received, it was absolutely inexcusable. If there's anything we can do to make this right, anything at all, please let me know immediately." Daniel looked at him for a long, thoughtful moment. "You can stop judging people by what they drive or what they wear. That would be a meaningful start." Victoria stepped forward on unsteady legs. For the first time since they had met, she seemed genuinely uncertain of herself. The armor of confidence she wore so comfortably had developed visible cracks. "I owe you an apology," she said, forcing herself to meet his steady eyes. "Several apologies, actually. What I said about your truck, about you being here, about knowing your limits, all of it." She paused, visibly struggling with the unfamiliar territory of genuine remorse. "I was wrong, completely wrong, and I'm truly sorry." Danielle studied her face carefully, seeing something there that went beyond mere social embarrassment. There was real shame in her eyes, the deep kind that comes from recognizing an ugly truth about oneself. "Why does it matter now?" he asked quietly. "You were perfectly happy to mock me when you thought I was poor. The only thing that's changed is you found out I'm not. My worth as a person hasn't changed in the last 10 minutes. Only your perception of it has. Victoria flinched, as if he had physically struck her. You're absolutely right, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. And that's the worst part. I was raised from birth to believe that money and status were the only true measures of a person's worth. I've spent my entire adult life operating on that assumption. Meeting someone who doesn't fit into that worldview is more disorienting than I expected. She glanced at Lily. Your daughter asked why people laughed at your truck. You gave her a beautiful answer about worth and love and kindness. I heard every single word and I realized that I've never been taught those lessons. Not really. Everything I learned growing up was about competition, about winning, about being better than everyone else in ways that could be measured and displayed. Daniel was quiet for a thoughtful moment. You can still learn them. It's not too late. Victoria managed a small, genuine smile. Perhaps the first truly authentic one she had offered all day. Maybe you're right, though I suspect the tuition for those particular lessons is higher than anything I've ever paid before. The cost is just honesty, Daniel said simply. Honesty about who you are and who you want to become. The transaction concluded with minimal additional ceremony, though the atmosphere in the showroom had shifted dramatically. Daniel signed the necessary documents with the same calm efficiency he had displayed throughout. He arranged for the Rolls-Royce to be delivered later that week, explaining that he had driven the truck today for a reason and intended to drive it home for the same reason. Before leaving, Victoria approached him one final time. The woman who stood before him now seemed fundamentally different from the one who had laughed at his truck less than 2 hours earlier. I know this doesn't make up for anything, she said quietly, but I want you to know that I won't forget today what you said to your daughter. The way you handled yourself with such dignity. It mattered. It mattered more than you probably realize. Daniel nodded slowly. I'm not looking for an enemy or a friend, Miss Hale. I just came to buy a car for my daughter's future. Something I can give her when she's old enough. The rest of what happened today was just people being people. You're remarkably forgiving. I'm not forgiving anything. Forgiveness implies holding a grudge first. I just don't have the energy for that. Life's too short. He paused. My wife passed away 3 years ago. Cancer. It taught me a lot about what actually matters and what's just noise. Someone laughing at my truck. That's noise. Victoria absorbed this. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. But my point is that you have a choice every day about who you want to be. Today you were someone who judged a stranger based on his car and his clothes. Tomorrow, you could be someone different. That's up to you. Mark had gathered the rest of the staff. Daniel addressed them collectively. I hope you'll all take something from this experience. Not about me or my money, but about assumptions. Every person who walks through those doors has a story you don't know. Treating them with respect isn't just good business. It's basic humanity. The staff nodded, some looking genuinely chastened. Mark shook Daniel's hand with considerably more enthusiasm than he had shown earlier. Daniel and Lily walked toward the exit together. The showroom watched them go in silence. A different kind of silence than the dismissive quiet that had greeted their arrival. The old Ford truck sat where they had left it, looking somehow less out of place than it had an hour ago. Daniel helped Lily into the passenger seat, then walked around to the driver's side. Before climbing in, he paused for a moment, looking back at the gleaming showroom. Then he got in the truck, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot. Lily was quiet for the first few minutes of the drive, watching the scenery pass by. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. Then she turned to her father with a serious expression. Daddy. Yes, sweetheart. Are you sad that they laughed at our truck? Daniel considered the question carefully. I was a little sad. Not for me, but for you. I didn't like that you had to hear those things, but you weren't mad. Being mad wouldn't have changed anything. It just would have made me feel worse, and probably scared you. He reached over and squeezed her hand. Besides, getting angry at people like that is like getting angry at the rain. It doesn't stop the rain. It just gets you wet. Lily processed this carefully. So, what do you do instead? You stay dry. You remember who you are and what you believe, and you don't let their rain get inside you. Is that why you didn't yell at the pretty lady? Partly, but also because yelling wouldn't have taught her anything. Sometimes the best way to change someone's mind is to show them they're wrong without making them feel attacked. Lily nodded slowly. She seemed different at the end. Nicer, she did. I think she learned something today. Whether she remembers it tomorrow, that's up to her. But at least she had the chance to see things differently. That's all any of us can really do for each other. They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the truck's engine providing a familiar backdrop to their thoughts. "Daddy," Lily said again, her voice smaller now. "Yes, baby? I'm glad our truck is old." Daniel glanced at her, surprised. "Yeah. Why is that?" "Because it has stories. That new car was pretty, but it didn't have any stories yet. Our truck has lots." She ran her small hand along the worn dashboard. "This is where Mommy put her coffee that one time, and it spilled everywhere. And that scratch on the door is from when we went camping, and the branch fell. And the seat has that squeaky spot that always makes me laugh." Daniel's throat tightened unexpectedly. "You remember all that?" "I remember everything about Mommy," Lily said simply. "And this truck remembers too. That's why you keep it, right? Because it remembers." Daniel had to blink several times before he could respond. "That's exactly right, sweetheart. That's exactly why." Lily settled back into her seat, satisfied. She understood the important parts. She understood that her father was a good man who didn't need fancy things to prove his worth. She understood that people could be wrong about you and that the wrongness said more about them than about you. And she understood that an old truck full of memories was worth more than any shiny new car could ever be. Daniel drove on toward home, his daughter beside him, the setting sun ahead of them. The Rolls-Royce would arrive eventually. But for now, he was exactly where he wanted to be, in his father's truck, with his daughter's hand in his, driving home through the golden light of a day that had turned out to be about much more than buying a car. The truck rumbled on, carrying its cargo of memories and love and hard-won wisdom, heading home as the sun set gold and amber on another day that mattered.